Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and what chapter you're on in the mysteries of Udolpho. One of them is explaining that he's just reached the part about the black veil. Do not tell him what's behind the black veil. And that's me, Matthew Millema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. So, listeners, as I may have mentioned a time or two before, I'm a big fan of Jane Austen. Also, incidentally, wait, let me redo that. So, incidentally, is Anselm President Brian Brown. We are still planning to launch that podcast, Austen Bros, together. Someday in the future, once our schedules clear up. Anyway, because I love Jane Austen, I know a fair amount about her life. For instance, I knew she was an avid and unapologetic reader of novels. I knew that she mentioned some of those novels in her own writing. For instance, I knew that Northanger Abbey was... So I'll just do that part. For instance, I knew that Northanger Abbey was poking fun in some kind of way to Anne Radcliffe's novels. I was also pretty sure that Frances Burney was involved, somehow. But I didn't know much beyond that. I knew that Jane Austen read a lot of novels and that she loved those novels. But nothing much beyond that, which is kind of weird if you think about it. I mean, if Jane Austen, someone who I believe is one of the greatest novelists of all time, thought that some other novel was great, shouldn't I want to learn more about that novel? Enter Sarah Pottinger. At a recent Anselm Arts Guild meeting, we started talking about this book she was reading. The book is Jane Austen's Bookshelf. It's by Rebecca Romney, who is a professional rare book collector. In the book, she tries to recreate Jane Austen's bookshelf. And along the way, she tells the story of the women writers whose writing shaped Jane Austen's own writing. Authors who, she argues, have been unjustly left out of the literary canon. So I obviously bought the book, and I absolutely love it. I cannot wait to talk about it. What do the authors who shaped Jane Austen tell us about Jane Austen's own writing? What can we learn from these unjustly forgotten authors? So, here to talk about Jane Austen and her bookshelf with me, we have Sarah Pottinger. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm good.
I am so glad you get, like, here's how much I love this book. We did a podcast recently about how I don't read books I read with my eyes very much, or paper books. Look, it's the paper book. And I was reading it. That's how much I enjoyed this book.
That is impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is why we have Arts Guild meetings, people, so we can talk about this stuff. And here to join us also is Mandy Hauk. Mandy, how are you doing?
I am good. And as I said in the green room, I am here to represent the listeners who have not yet read this book, but have heard about it. I have it on hold at the library. I'm like number 20 in line.
Well, that helps us a lot for our purposes, Mandy. Thank you for telling us you're going to read the book later.
Yes. Aren't you glad
I feel like
here?
I'm you back when you were a teacher, so you didn't do the reading. Okay, fine.
No, I thought, maybe I'll have insightful questions as the ignoramus.
There you go. No, insightful. We'll stick with the insightful part.
Okay.
So, Sarah, let's start with you, because you are the one who initially found this book and made the recommendations. What were your high-level impressions of the book?
People at work were asking me about it as I read it, and I said, it makes me want to buy more books. Like, it makes me want to start collecting rare books, which is dangerous, because that's expensive. And it also made me somewhat angry as a woman, because a lot of what happened to these women who have disappeared from our talk about English novelists was because of their gender and the things that were going on culturally in their time period and how writing was viewed and writing by women. And so those were like my overall impressions when I first finished reading.
Yeah.
Now I want to ask, because you're a library. Well, you work at a library. So when you say at work, people were talking to you about it, you're talking about library people. Had any of them read it?
They have not, as far as I know. And I feel like they would tell me if they had, because we talk
Well, yeah.
about what we're reading all the time. I did replace my Jane Austen collection with a really nice fancy set and brought my old ones into work, and everybody took one. So I feel like if I can't get them to read this book, at least I can get them to read more Jane Austen. So I'm working on it.
There you go. Just sowing the seeds out there. That all sounds great. And I will just echo some of your high level points because first off, I realized an error that we had in an earlier podcast we did. We recorded a podcast about like, is the novel a format that is more geared toward women, especially in the publishing industry today? And as part of that, we assumed that up until quite recently, novel writing was dominated by men. And that's actually not accurate because even during Jane Austen's times, we're talking late 1700s, early 1800s, the majority of novels were written by women. And so that was something that was well established. And a lot of very popular, very successful authors were women. Authors that I totally agree with you, Sarah. It was kind of shocking that some of these writers are left out of the canon. So let's talk about the canon first off, because something that Romney mentioned in her introduction, which I thought was a really insightful point, was the thought that Jane Austen kind of took the woman's spot in the canon. And because we all exist, she gets the spot and no one else can have a spot, which sounds ridiculous, but that is how I think these sort of literary lists work sometimes, right? We have like the spot for this thing, the spot for this person. We have the spot for this decade, then this decade. Oh, and there's Jane Austen. She's the woman. And Anne Radcliffe, she's really good, but not as good as Jane Austen. Sorry, our woman's spot is taken. And that's something you still see now, right? Like look toward the back pages of most collections of like Western literature. You get to modern times, you get the feeling that the people who compiled it have like a checklist, right? Okay, now we need an Asian author, and we need a gay author, and we need a gay Asian author, and now we need a gay Asian woman. And it's like, okay, it's just like, it's not about, oh, this author's really good, or this author says something important. It's, oh, we need to check this box. And you get the feeling like, oh, we already have our Asian spot. Sorry. And that's the way it is with this. It's Jane Austen, she's the woman, so we need to kick all the other ones out. Anything else that stuck out to you about how we view this in terms of like the canon, Sarah?
Yes. Romney talks again and again throughout. I did a lot of skimming back through it as I was taking notes, and she talks a lot about what comparison did to these women and compared to other writers and compared to Jane Austen, and how it struck me that what you're talking about, where one person is representative of all women authors or a whole genre, that's really reductive. And when I didn't catch this the first time, but when I was skimming through it again, there was a quote I think it was in the conclusion that really struck me, where she said, when we use comparison as a way to rank rather than to reveal, all we do is dim our curiosity. And I thought that was really illustrates what happens when we only hold up Jane Austen and all these other authors fall by the wayside, and how much we lose by them falling out of familiarity and not piquing anyone's curiosity.
Yeah, because she went through a lot of like, studies of the novel form, right? And they'd get like the list, and there'd be several men who were always there during this time alongside Jane Austen. They were well respected male authors, right? Like what's his name? Felding, and what was the other guy? Felding. I'll think of him. He's not important, but anyway,
Yeah, I don't.
they're all
Yeah, we're talking
they're
about
always
women.
listed together, and it's not like, well, we already have our dude spot. Sorry, Felding, this other guy is slightly better than you, so you're off the list. So we have all of these guys who some are better than others, but they're all on the list. So that leads me to sort of where things were at the time Jane Austen was both reading, she was preparing her novels, she was getting her novels out there. So like 1790s through like 80s, like that era, where that was a really important era for the novel. The novel and in its modern form was sort of coming into being. A lot of novels out there. And like I mentioned earlier, the majority of these novels are being published by women, but we have this sort of impression of the novels Jane Austen read. Let me get your impression, Mandy. I know you're going to be able to pick up on context clues to know what you should say. But let's be honest, your impression is
Okay.
coming into this. If I were to tell you Jane Austen read a bunch of novels when she was a girl, what would be your knee-jerk impression of what those novels must have been like?
Think that they would be similar to what she ended up writing, like that they would, and that they would. Do you mean like
Yeah,
who
yeah. Well,
wrote
what
them?
they would be like?
That they would be similar. I guess I'm just going to restate myself. Speaking of editing, you can edit that out. My assumption of what kinds of books Jane Austen would have read. Well, I would think that they would be books about her, the level of society that she was in, that they would probably be written by women. I'm guessing that because you said that, little did we know, but most novels were written by women. I'm not
So
really
let me
sure
see if I
what else
can
to say there.
sort of would it be fair to say you kind of would have assumed that the books Jane Austen read were kind of crappier versions of Jane Austen, right? It's like the same sort of stuff as Jane Austen, but not as good.
Yeah. Oh, you mean okay. Yes, because I guess that's sort of what I was saying. Like books that she would get ideas from, but then she would improve upon
Yes.
them is kind of what I
Yeah.
meant. So if that's what you were trying to get me to say, then there it
Thank
is.
you. Thank you. So yeah, that was
You're welcome. I'm here for you.
if you would have like tried to like pin me down to this before reading the book, I probably would have given that answer, right? It's like, okay, she read lots of books. I know these gothic things with Anne Radcliffe, some other like, courtship books, things that, might have been nice enough. But wow, Jane Austen, turning that stuff into literature. Isn't Jane Austen great? And again, these are my sort of
Right.
un,
Yeah, because then
unexamined assumptions. How about you, Sarah? What were your impressions of the books you would have guessed Jane Austen would have read back in the day prior to reading this book?
Well, I was familiar with a couple of names just from having read all of Jane Austen and reading a couple of biographies. There was definitely more names in here than I recognized, and I'm just looking for the table of contents. I lost my point too. Hang on a sec. I did actually try once to read The Mysteries of Udolpho, and I couldn't get into it, so I gave up on it. My opinion has changed a little bit after reading this. I'd like to go back and read that. But I don't know if I really had an opinion of the other writers that have been mentioned. I definitely didn't really have a desire to find out anything about them because Jane Austen's like the pinnacle, and it's just a thing that you hear and you repeat, and then you read the books and you like them and you repeat it yourself
Yeah,
I mean
because you
there is
don't
the
know any different.
right. There's the Austen versus Bronte debate, but it's
Yeah.
really that's kind of as far as it goes. Now, can I ask, as someone who hasn't read the book, aren't you glad I'm here to ask questions from this
Yes.
perspective? You're welcome. Um, are so how is the book formatted? Is it just going through literally like the books that she would have read? And is it all women or is it primarily or what did she read?
yeah.
Or am I jumping ahead too
So the
far?
book, after an introduction where she sort of introduces this topic, sort of where we are right now, about the fact that it is odd that we don't seem to care about the authors who Jane Austen thought were great, right? And I do want to linger on that point
Hmm.
just a little bit longer because it
Yeah.
it is odd. Again, I'm someone who loves Jane Austen. I think she's one of the greatest novelists of all time. She thought these novels were great and wanted to imitate them. I had no desire to read them because, like you mentioned, Sarah, it's like my thought is like, well, why read Austen imitations if I have the real thing? Even though, again, Austen was imitating them, not the other way around. And also, that I'm just playing the part of that Western literary guy who we've just been mocking, right? It's like, I already have Austen, so why do I need another one? So that really got to me, and it just did emphasize, like, if nothing else, the fact that one of the greatest novelists of all time read a novel and thought it was great that should be enough for us to at least be given a fair trial, right? And then after that, and that's actually a good place to transition, she goes author by author. So she goes through several authors,
Okay.
explains how Austen would have been familiar with them, and then goes through their work and why it was significant to Jane Austen, but also just why it's something that would be interesting today. But before she does that, she gave us just a little bit of background on Jane Austen herself, her life, her family, which I found so delightful. I love that chapter so much. Sarah, any particular nuggets you picked about dear Aunt Jane, as her family called her?
Well, I have read two biographies, one written by a man and one written by a woman, which is interesting. The one written by a man I read a long time ago, so I don't remember it that well. So there wasn't a lot like I didn't know just from having done that. And I do appreciate like the way it kind of went through her publishing journey. So you could kind of see what kind of environment she was writing in and how she was going about things, like how she was anonymous for a while with her first couple of novels. And that was like the fashionable thing to do at the time. So it wasn't weird and it wasn't like she didn't want to take credit. It was just, it's what people did. And that I hadn't really nobody I've read has really done a deep dive into like her publishing process. So that was really interesting to me. And yeah, it goes through like every single novel of hers. And it did talk about like, why we don't actually have a lot of firsthand information about her because her sister burned a lot of letters after she died. And that was kind of my theory is that she was kind of shaping her image to be like nice. And the word Rebecca Romney uses is
Sweet.
sweet, which is very like when the Regency era was shifting into the more prim and proper Victorian era. And that was right after she died. So I think it was her nephew who wrote a memoirs of Jane Austen. And that was very like, she was nice and sweet. And that's where Dear Aunt Jane kind of comes from. But
Okay.
my theory is that her sister Cassandra burned the letters where she was a little like sassier, like maybe a little mean even. Because every once in a while you come across a letter where it's like, wow, that's something I would tell my sister, but I wouldn't like want published. So you can kind of see
Yeah.
where Cassandra was like, I really don't want people to see my sister as the sum of like her mean parts. So she kind of sanitized things a bit. So between that and the memoirs, that was very like
Was it
pointing us
curated?
to a specific image, yes.
Yeah.
And not necessarily an accurate portrayal.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate um the way she did kind of explain in the book. She didn't go as deep into it as some of the biographies I read, but she did talk about how probably more that we don't know about just because we don't have that material anymore. It was burned up.
Yeah, so a couple things that really stood out to me from just the Jane Austen background was one, I am convinced that if the Austen family were in Colorado Springs, traveled here through a time warp, they would be very active in the Anselm Society because their activities growing up were
Absolutely.
very Anselmy. Uh, Jane, I think, had four siblings, so a couple brothers, couple sisters. They were all very successful in different spheres of life. Like one brother became like really wealthy, another one became like an admiral. Her two sisters were also very well accomplished. So they're very close. They read novels all the time. They put on family plays. They acted out parts. They were all of them very active in this sort of scene. I think they just slide right into the arts guild. But to Jane's later reputation, it was really fascinating because you saw what was going on, like I mentioned after she died. And let's also point out she died very young. We don't know exactly why, but some speculated maybe an autoimmune disease. Also, she could have just had cancer, but she died at age 41. And her family did take some steps to kind of curate the image. Like you mentioned, her sister burned a lot of her correspondence, but it is important to note that that was a pretty common practice back in the day. Like it was kind of considered an act of respect to the deceased privacy. Let's just sort of don't flaunt that out there. So there was that aspect, but there's also the curation. And then it's clear she had a really, really great relationship with her family. So her siblings, her parents, she had lots of nieces and nephews that she was very close to. One of those nephews did write that book about sweet Aunt Jane. And it's interesting because I don't doubt that she was a very kind and sweet person, but I do doubt that she was only that, because you only need to look at her novels to see that she could be just vicious in her sarcasm. And like you said,
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, go
Sarah,
ahead.
sure, like some of the lines we get in the letters that have survived, they are really there's some burns in there. Like she could really do that when she wanted to. She clearly had a knack for it. She has this really great dry sense of humor. I think she's hilarious, and I just love all the correspondence we have of her. So people contain multitudes. I wouldn't doubt that she could be very sweet to her beloved nephew, while also be really sassy when she's talking about a book she didn't like. But this is this image that has been passed down on Jane Austen. But now let's go from Jane to talk. Oh, yes, Mandy. Thank you for raising your hand, even though you
No,
didn't do
I
the
was just
reading.
gonna thank you. Hey, I was honest about it, man. No, I was just gonna say, just to piggyback on what you were saying, I mean, the way that she writes her characters, it's not it would be impossible to imagine she didn't have sharp opinions about people in her real life. I mean, come on, Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Collins, there's, even just the way she wrote them. I always feel like she loved all of her characters, but she also found them all various degrees very ridiculous. And so I feel like that outlook that she has in her characters, I'm sure that carried over into her real life.
Yeah, and now let's
So,
talk about the different types of novels at that time, because this is a time, again, the novel's taking its form. Some of the lingo isn't quite set, right? Because some would call the novel at this time a novel was a particular type of long prose book that had to do with like events that are happening in the modern day, versus a romance, which would be things like during Arthurian times or something. So we used to have different categories for this. And the novel, I thought this was hilarious because, again, I loved Jane Austen's attitude toward reading novels. It's clear that at the time, I'm going to test drive a take here. Guys, let me know if I'm on the right track. To me, novels during Jane Austen's time were basically like video games are today. It's assumed that if you are a cultured, sophisticated person, you don't do it. Or if you do it every now and then, kind of for some guilty pleasure, but you don't admit to liking them. Certainly not in front of sophisticated people, right? Because it's assumed that they're a waste of time at best, they're bad for morals, and they'll just corrupt the young at worst. Difference is video games are corrupting the young men, and the novels are apparently corrupting the young ladies. But I think that it's really similar to that. And Jane Austen, just again, she defended novels. She was absolutely unapologetic of it. She would kind of viciously satire people who thought that they were too sophisticated for novels. She's kind of an anti-snob in that way, and I really respect it. It made me think of the episode we had about beach reads, where basically books that we were kind of denigrating as, oh, they're only fun. I get the feeling, again, if we put Jane Austen in the Times machine, let her read some of these books, I think she'd really enjoy them and she'd defend them and be like, oh, yeah, well, that one's not good. But this one, it's really insightful on human character. The prose is really excellent. Don't let the fact that it's a quote unquote thriller that Reese Witherspoon likes, don't let that mean that you're too sophisticated for it. Get over yourself. So I absolutely love that about her. Again, I just think she's the best. But now let's get into the particular authors. Let's sort of start wide here. Sarah, were there any particular authors that stood out to you and that sort of got your attention in a special way?
Two of them are named Charlotte, so I get them
I was
mixed
getting
up,
them mixed up too.
which is a problem. Whichever, I think it might be Charlotte
Yeah.
Smith, the
She's the one
one
with
who
the awful
was
husband, right?
poor and always struggling.
Okay.
Yes, she was the one who she had a bunch of kids she was trying to feed. Her husband was an idiot. And so, like, a lot of the artistic decisions she made were how she could get more money.
mm, okay.
So So that kind of shaped how her novels were. Like there's one where Rebecca Romney, this author, says it feels it would be better without this other part to it, like a second or third
Yeah.
part. And the reason Charlotte did that was because she needed the money she would get from a longer book. So it may not have necessarily been the way she wanted the story to be or where she wanted it to finish, but she had bills to pay and mouths to feed, and I had no idea that anybody like her existed, let alone was influencing Jane Austen. So
Were
that
these
jumped out at me.
serialized? Was it like Dickens, how they were serialized and that's why the longer book got more
Nah,
money, or
I
did
think
they just pay per
one of
page?
them I think maybe one of them was serialized, but mostly they were in volumes.
Okay.
And like a volume would come out and then the next volume and then the next volume. So it's kind of like
Yeah,
that.
and books were really expensive back then.
And then
So it was a pretty
Yeah.
common practice where
yeah.
they'd have like libraries, but they're kind of different, where it's sort of like a subscription service where like you pay a monthly amount and there'd be like these books that get passed around and you get a chance to read it. And a lot of times these books would be chopped up into
Okay.
different volumes,
That
kind
is
of like
so
proto
cool.
Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the CDs in the
Exactly.
mail. Yeah,
So
gotcha.
something on Charlotte Smith really quick, Sarah. A couple things stood out to me about her because again, it just shows just how fortunate we are to get any literature at all. Because when you think about how many talented people have been just foiled about all this stuff, because Charlotte Smith, she did everything she could, but she just was up against it her whole life for reasons totally beyond her control. She gets married at 16 or 15, someone who her parents choose for her. She really has no say in the matter. This guy comes from a rich family, but the guy's an absolute idiot. Like he's always getting these huge gambling debts. He's abusive. He's always running off, but he's always making Charlotte bring along the many children. He's fertile, so give him that. So she has like 12 pregnancies throughout her life. It's just constant. So this guy is always getting into major debt, getting him and Charlotte thrown into literal debtor's prison, and then making sure that Charlotte has to care for all these children somehow. And any money that Charlotte earns from the book goes right to him. And it's just a terrible system. And the thing about it is, Charlotte, from the contemporary sources, was an immensely talented poet. Like immensely. Like she was put on the same footing as folks like Wordsworth. Like she had all-time talent, but she couldn't really give the time needed to her poetry because she needed to write things that were more marketable so she could get money to feed her children. So she wrote novels even though she didn't really want to. And like you mentioned, Sarah, one of her novels was the first part. She had to write kind of a crappy second part because she needed the money. And it's just a simple thing. It's like she wrote to not be thrown into debtor's prison and so that her children wouldn't starve. And even then, she was still able to
Oh my goodness.
produce a great novel and lots of great poetry that absolutely had an influence on Jane Austen. So I will tell you some of the ones who really got me. So the first one was Frances Burney, who was sort of the first author they led off with. And it's clear that Jane Austen thinks very, very highly of Frances Burney. She name checks her at one point in Northanger Abbey, just say, hey, some of these novels have great insight into human character. They're the best things written. Look, for instance, at these two novels by Frances Burney, right? So Jane Austen held her in very high esteem. She herself is kind of an interesting part because she was the sort of person who seemed to not really like the public light. So she was friends with Samuel Johnson, who, by the way, Sarah, we need to throw some kudos over to Samuel Johnson and Sir Walter Scott. It seems like for every one of these authors, it was mentioned that Samuel Johnson and Sir Walter Scott were great admirers of their work and worked very hard to make sure that these women got the recognition they deserved. A tip of the hat to Samuel Johnson and Sir Walter Scott. But anyway, Frances Burney. One of the things that stood out to me about this was the author of this book, so Rebecca Romney, her trying to psych herself into reading Evelina, which is this really great novel that Frances Burney wrote about this young woman who's trying to find her way in London. Jane Austen loved the book to pieces, but the author, Romney, just can't bring herself to read it. So can I just say, after reading this book, I put some requests in the library for these books. I was like, okay, I'll do it. I have checked out Evelina, and as I was contemplating, I was like, I
Wow.
don't think I could do this. I just don't have it in me right now. What were you?
Why?
It just seems like so
Explain.
much. It's so much, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It just seems so daunting. Sarah, can you defend me here? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you need to be in the right frame of mind. Think
Difficult book.
you need to
Like, okay.
kind of, I would describe it as kind of coming at it like you would Shakespeare, where it's almost like
Okay.
your brain is translating it into something that you can understand because it's so archaic, especially
Okay.
Shakespeare. But
Yeah.
this, to some extent, it's just a style that we're not used to reading.
Okay.
That can make it really, I think that puts a lot of people off from Jane Austen, honestly, because they think it's stuffy and just over their heads. And I had a point to that. I'm sorry.
Well, in large part, you were defending me being
Evelina.
afraid to read Evelina, so I appreciate that.
Yes, yes. I understand where you're coming from, and I understand where she's coming from. And I have not read any of these books that have been mentioned. I do want to. They're all on my Goodreads list.
Yes.
So someday.
So here's the one that I'm the most excited about. I put a hold for it, and when I get it, I fully intend to read it. And that is, let me make sure I get the title right, and I'm going to mispronounce it, but that's okay. So that is going to be. I can't wait for that one to come out either. The Mysteries of. What do you think? Udolpho or Udolpho? Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe.
I always said it Udolpho, but I don't know if that's right. It just
I
sounds
agree.
better
So,
to
The
me.
Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. She was another really fascinating character.
Yes.
Again, championed by Samuel Johnson. So, good job, Sam. But also, what I found, a few things I found fascinating about her. One, she gets married to this guy who is like a reporter. He's like a Parliament reporter, right? So, very early sort of beat reporter. But so while she's away, she's newly married. Her husband's off at this cool job. She starts writing gothic horror stories. Apparently, she was raised by an uncle who like studied gothic literature, just is like a professor or something like that. So she's just seeped in this world.
And
Yeah,
architecture.
gothic architecture. So she starts writing these tales of like horror and suspense, and then when her husband comes back, she makes him read them, and then she laughs hysterically when her husband gets freaked out by it.
Oh,
She
that's
eventually becomes
awesome.
very successful. Luckily, Anne Radcliffe, her husband was a good guy, very supportive of her. But the thing about her that I find so interesting is she is credited with really pioneering the gothic genre, right? Back then, we would have called this a romance. Again, it's something that takes place in the past. So it would have been different from a novel. It's a romance. But she's so successful at the story that she kind of births a whole genre. And what I was familiar with the name Anne Radcliffe. I knew she wrote sort of gothic-y, like stories. I kind of had it in my head that they were kind of silly fun. Like maybe they're kind of goofy and maybe it made people back in those days entertained. But what really stuck out to me was how many really serious, really talented authors thought Anne Radcliffe was amazing. Now, first off, her books were extremely popular. She made a ton of money, and I mentioned there's a part in one of the Jane Austen novels, I think it's Northanger Abbey, where one of the characters, one of the good guys, is talking about how he's midway through the Mysteries of Udolpho, and he's like, "Oh, I've just reached the Black Veil. Do not tell me what's behind the Black Veil." And that's just like a thing. It's like it was a sensation. It'd be the sort of thing. Hey, did you read that book yet? Oh, what'd you think of this? What'd you think of this? It's sort of like how we'd view like a bingeable TV show. It's like it's that sort of thing. It was all over the place, but that's double-edged sword because I mentioned that novels were written by women, but these novels, in addition to being popular with women, were popular with gasp the general public. Just common people really like these, so that means they're not sophisticated at all.
No.
But again, when
No.
you look at it, the people who love this book include, let's see, Percy Shelley, his wife Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, who loves her writing so
Yes.
much he plagiarized one of her descriptions for his book, The Childe Harold. I believe Coleridge really liked her. All of these really serious, like very accomplished poets thought Anne Radcliffe was an amazing writer. And that's totally something that's overlooked. We think of her as an author of silly ghost stories, but really she was a very serious writer, great prose stylist who created her own genre.
That's amazing. I'm gonna have to look into that. Now, I was wondering, you guys mentioned earlier that it was common for people to write anonymously instead of under a name. Is that because novels were viewed as a guilty pleasure? Was it shameful to be, not shameful necessarily, but was it something they weren't necessarily proud
Yeah,
of being an author? So they would just,
so it would
okay,
vary from person to
Yeah, I'm
person.
interesting.
trying to find the
Yeah,
quote.
for like Frances
Okay,
Burney, she hid her her novel writing from her family. Like she wrote novels in secret as a teenager because, again, novels were considered kind of shameful. Kind of like, we'd have
yeah,
today we have these schools saying, "Ah, you boys are rotting your brains on these video games." Back in the day, it was like young women are rotting their
right.
brains and their morals with with these novels, these scribblers.
Novels,
So Frances Burney had to
right.
hide it, and she was really ashamed of it. She kept it secret from her father for years and years. Now, finally, her father did find
Wow.
out, and it turned out he was very proud of her, and it was all very moving. But it was a very long journey
Oh,
to that. And for some women,
wow.
I think men would write anonymously too. It was a pretty common practice. But then eventually it would reach the
Hmm.
point where it's like it was kind of an open secret who it was. Like people kind of knew Jane Austen wrote
Mm,
Pride and Prejudice before it was official. Like her nieces and nephews were warned, like, hey, I know you're proud of Aunt Jane for writing Pride and Prejudice. Don't mention it in front of her. We're kind of keeping it secret officially. So it really varied from person to person,
right.
but it was a common practice.
Did you have a quote you were
And
gonna share, Sarah?
yeah, there was a book that was really popular. It's mentioned in the Frances Burney chapter, but Jane Austen also mentions it in Pride and Prejudice. It was Mary's favorite book and Mr. Collins. It was Sermons to Young Women
Yes.
Hmm.
by James Fordyce. And the things he says about novel reading, oh my goodness. He said the only kind of woman who would read any of the racier novels available at the time, quote, must in her soul be a prostitute, let her reputation in life be what it will, quote. And then Rebecca Romney says that is a real quote from a book. And then she goes on to say that he proclaimed that those who read such novels, quote, carry on their very forehead the mark of the beast. And that was an extremely popular book. So like that's some of the opinion that was going around about people who read novels,
It
not even
wasn't
people who
fringe.
wrote them.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I love that
that's kind
Jane.
of
See, she's so
also what they were up
cheeky.
Yeah,
against. And they do it anyway because they love to write
exactly.
Yeah.
and
And
read.
so that leads naturally to Hannah More, who's kind of a foil in the book. And so
She's
Hannah
fun,
More is a complicated
but not.
person. I believe Karen Swallow Pryor wrote a very well received biography of her, Fierce Convictions. Friend of the show, Karen Swallow Pryor. So
Yes.
I wish she could be here to speak up for Hannah More in some ways. But Hannah More is one of those people who has a lot of very great qualities, but also qualities like yikes. Like for one thing, she was
Rigid.
literally a genius. Like you mentioned this already, Sarah, that her father wasn't a big fan of teaching women, and when he started teaching her as a little girl, he's like, "Oh gosh, what have I done? She's learning so quick." Like she was a genius. She was a toast of literary society, very accomplished poet. She kind of gets lucky with a broken engagement that ends up the guy strung her along for years and years when she was a young woman, and then to admit that he'd been a jerk all along, he sets her up with this huge annual sum. So she's set for life, doesn't have to worry about marrying, has all the time in the world to devote to her writing. She is a fierce evangelical. This is a time when evangelical meant something slightly different than it does today or in recent history. But among other things, she was a fierce abolitionist, like outspoken about it. She spoke very strongly in terms of like education reform, better working conditions for the poor, a lot of very good causes, a lot of great things about her. But she hated novels for a lot of the reasons you just discussed, Sarah. She's kind of, in one sense, she disapproved of her fancy literary circles that she was invited into because she was a accomplished author, because she thought that they were like morally degraded, and they probably were in some ways. So you admire her for being able to say no to like the in crowd and do her own thing, but it does kind of take on a holier than thou moral tone that I'm not sure was totally great. Some of her actions for quote unquote helping the poor don't quite ring true today. And yeah, her novel hating is really pretty extreme. And then she went ahead and wrote a novel that Jane Austen read, and the novel was immensely popular, but it also sounds like it was really bad because it's basically a series of sermons disguised as a novel. Can't imagine anyone want.
Message
Yeah,
fiction.
I can't imagine anyone wanting to read it. But yeah, Sarah, what was your take on Hannah More?
What caught me first was the quote that begins the chapter. It's from, presumably from a letter Jane Austen wrote. And she said about this novel, "Of course, I shall be delighted when I read it, like other people, but till I do, I dislike it." And that just made me think of like when a book or a show or a movie is so popular, everybody's talking about it, and it makes you want to not read it or watch it because you don't want to just buy into all the hype. But also, I think it may be because she didn't like it very much, but it's
Yeah,
hard to tell.
Speaking of our former podcast episode, art that's cool to hate. So Jane thought it was cool
Yes.
to hate Hannah More's novel before she
Yeah.
even read it.
And I think this might be the one. Yes. This is the one that Rebecca Romney, this author, she couldn't get through. So she
Okay.
tried and she just could not make herself do it. So she
yeah,
gave up.
because
That's
one of the
funny.
things I enjoyed about this was just seeing Romney interact with these novels for the first time. She'd be like, "I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Here's the reasons I loved it." And Moore was the one where she needed to write about her because she was very important. Jane Austen was very aware of her writing, but again, Moore is a complicated person. She contains a lot of great things and a lot of things that are very unappealing, especially to us in the modern day. Something that is still appealing to us in the modern day. I love the chapter on Elizabeth Inchbald. She's the one who was the
Yeah.
milkmaid who ran away from home when she was like 17 to join a London theater troupe, and she friggin' pulled it off.
Oh, that's
She married an older
amazing.
actor, which sounded sketchy, but turned out they actually probably had a pretty good relationship. Then the dude dies. She gets established as an actress. It's very clear she makes it as an actress because she's beautiful and she's dedicated, but she's not a very good actress. But then she finally gets a shot at writing plays. And when she does write the plays, they're immensely successful. And also, the thing that really gets me is they're really funny. Like the first play she read, she wrote, was about a group of Londoners who get who take a hot air balloon and accidentally land in the court of like a Middle Eastern sultan. I was like, okay, that does sound pretty interesting. I'm in for that. But her her plays were just hysterically funny. There's reports like people just like crying because they're laughing so hard. She's known for her really great dialogue, her really great sense of like timing and rhythm. Her training as an actor really comes through in getting something that's really funny. And significantly for Jane Austen, the play that's the subject of Mansfield Park is an adaptation of a play by Elizabeth Inchbald. Like she was an immensely important playwright at the time who's fallen through the cracks of history. But again, she's a woman who was known for being hysterically funny and a writer of really funny plays.
Yeah, kind of to tie Hannah More and Elizabeth Inchbald together in the ways that their influence is seen in Mansfield Park. Um, Obviously, Inchbald's play "Lover's Vows" is the center of some conflict in Mansfield Park, where the family is going to put on the play, but the content of it, some of the characters are concerned about the racier
It's
aspects of the
racy.
plot
It's racy.
and the propriety of it's racy, the propriety of portraying these characters. And then you can kind of see Hannah More's like moral influence somewhat also in Mansfield Park, but it's not. I think the way Romney put it was Jane Austen agreed with Hannah More on some points and disagreed on others, and that kind of comes across in Mansfield Park. I know lots of people don't like Mansfield Park because they find it kind of preachy. It's also pretty dark. I would say it's her darkest novel, but I personally love it just because I'm a Fanny Price fan. It's interesting to see how um also the play that she picks to put in this novel, the events in the play somewhat foreshadow and reflect events in Mansfield Park, which is really an interesting way to pull it in. Like maybe that was behind some of her thinking in the choice she made of what play to put in there. And maybe it was a play her family had talked about putting on but decided not to. I know she mentioned somewhere in the Elizabeth Inchbald chapter that one of the family friends was concerned about portraying a certain character because it would reflect badly on her as a upstanding widow. So so I just feel like that the way that reflected in the novel was really interesting and kind of gave me a better appreciation for that part of the novel because it's something I kind of gloss over and I'm not really interested in when I read it. That's not why what I read it for. But I sort of have a new appreciation for it now being shown the value that Jane Austen might have found in
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And you see how it served the themes and the plot of Mansfield Park as well, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. First, I think a lot of us modern readers would see, okay, they're putting on a play. Fanny, she's just being a prude, right? Like, she's being a prude. We won't go along with this. Why would you be upset? Just have a little fun. But back in the day, that sort of thing was considered a little edgy and a little racy. So a nice proper girl like her, it's not sort of thing you should really be doing. And she cared about that. But she is the poor relative who's staying with the rich relatives and is staying at the rich relative's pleasure. So she's in a very vulnerable position there where she needs to sort of walk this line. She can't ruffle any feathers, but she also needs to maintain her character, but she needs to make sure that this person doesn't get mad at her. It shows that she gets pilloried a lot. Like Jane Austen's own mother thought that this heroine was insipid, but it shows that she is trying to walk a very delicate line and really shows the stakes of the novel that probably would have been a lot more obvious to the original readers than they might be today. But I feel
Checking
like
my
this
notes.
is one of those books where every page there's like some little nugget or pearls like, ah, how interesting. So like, and I just like cackle to myself every now and then as I'm reading it. It was a very pleasant reading experience. But Sarah, any closing
Yeah,
thoughts?
I definitely want to read it. Yeah, I don't have any more questions. I just need to go get the book. Get that
Yes.
wait list. I'll just order it. I'll buy it.
I really enjoyed seeing the author's relationship with Jane Austen change throughout the novel. That just made it feel more personal, and I think it also makes it more readable than like a survey of all these authors would be. She always connected herself and her values and her experiences to each author, and that kind of made it more readable to me. I also really liked, we didn't talk about this a whole lot except at the beginning. I also like how she made an effort to trace how each of these authors disappeared from the canon or has been brought back in, as with Anne Radcliffe and Frances Burney to some extent. Because you ask yourself, why have I not heard any of these names before? And she is very deliberate about telling you why. And she does all the research so that she can tell you why. And I really enjoyed getting that perspective to kind of illustrate why I don't know those names anymore.
Yeah, and there's different answers to that question too, right? Because like she mentioned that one of the reasons Anne Radcliffe fell out of the canon for a while is she was a very private person. Like she didn't enjoy going out in front of people. She didn't enjoy interacting with fans or going to the fancy literary society stuff. And she didn't have a large correspondence because again, she was a very private person who liked to write horrific stories to terrify her husband. So like they mentioned at one point that a few decades after her death, Christina Rossetti, one of the greatest poets of all time and one of the greatest poets of her era, also noteworthy. Christina Rossetti, huge fan of Anne Radcliffe, and she wanted to write a biography of Anne Radcliffe. And you have to think if one of the greatest poets of the Victorian age wrote a biography of Anne Radcliffe, that would have done a lot for Anne Radcliffe's stature. But there just wasn't enough material. Like Christina Rossetti tried, but there wasn't enough out there. So she wrote her publisher like, I tried, I despair. So that was one reason.
Wow.
Yeah, I love that. She said, I despair and give it up.
But like you said,
That's
some of
funny.
these women are finally coming back to the canon, especially Frances Burney and Anne Radcliffe. Just a couple things I wanted to close on. I love this line by Jane Austen because Jane Austen, again, she's so funny. She has like this dry sense of humor in her letters. So I believe it was her niece, Anna Austen, was also trying to make it as an author. So Jane's being supportive of her. And she's talking about this author that she likes, Maria Edgeworth, who's kind of half a generation ahead of her, very well established. Jane says to her niece, Anna, I've made up my mind to like no novels really, but Miss Edgeworth's, yours, and my own. So that's I only like my novels,
That's
my niece's
enough.
novels. Oh, and also Maria Edgeworth, because obviously, I mean, come on. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
I think she might have been an Edgeworth fangirl.
Yes. Even when Jane Austen was just getting established, Maria Edgeworth was way more popular. Jane Austen sent a copy of one of her books to Maria Edgeworth just because it was very important to her that her idol, has a copy of her book. P.S. That actual book has been put up for auction and it sold for a lot of money.
Wow.
But yeah, you see a very diverse swath of women here. You see folks like Frances Burney, who's very shy and kind of retiring from public, Anne Radcliffe, who didn't like the spotlight at all. Then you see folks like Charlotte Smith, who are scraping by even though the whole world's against them. Elizabeth Inchbald, who's this very bold actress who's really funny. Someone we didn't talk about, Charlotte Lennox, who's came from nothing but was able to make it in society just basically based on gumption and always saying what she wanted to say. And who's this? We haven't mentioned her yet, which is a shame. Hester Lynch Thrall Piazzi, who was a character.
She was quite a character.
When she got into her 80s, let me put it this way, she kept a list of enemies who have predeceased her.
Wow, that's fantastic.
This person always hated me, but they're dead now. So you just get this huge swath of...
I outlived them.
Exactly. This huge swath of very different women with very different temperaments who write very different books. But I think Romney makes a great case that Jane Austen thought they were all great. And, when we actually read it, I think we'll conclude the same thing. All right. So there we have it. Again, the book is Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. I highly recommend it. And I'm sure once Mandy actually reads it, she will as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Sarah, for the recommendation. And listeners, as you can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire's down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have a few seconds to spare right now, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time. All right, there we go.
Yay.
Yay.
Hey, I told you I didn't read it, and I asked if it was okay that I join you.
Of course it was. Right. Of course it was okay that you joined us.
Want to.
My to-read list stack is huge.
Mandy,
so
if you weren't here having not read the book, who would we tell all these funny jokes to? Come on.
Exactly. We would just be talking to each other about stuff we already knew.
I think I said wow 1,400 times, so sorry for that.
Oh, no, it's fine. Oh, something else you should know about this, Mandy. One of the reasons, Sarah, I could tell instantly I was going to like this book. So Rebecca Romney, in addition to being a big Jane Austen fan, kept quoting Sherlock Holmes in the opening chapter. It was like, hey, Sherlock Holmes, Jane Austen. Nice. Hey, there we go. I think we're going to understand each other very well.
That's awesome.
Also, side note, which we didn't mention on the podcast, Rebecca Romney is also let me check the exact wording, the rare books specialist for the show Pawn Stars, which I think is hilarious.
I've seen ads for Pawn Stars.
You know what I was wondering?
I've seen clips.
Yeah.
You know what I was wondering? Because she talked about at one point growing up in like this kind of fundamentalist Mormon home. Her last name's Romney and she's Mormon. Is she a mid relative? I mean, is that a thing?
I don't know.
Could be.
I hadn't made that connection. That would be interesting to know.
I mean, they all have a lot of relatives. That's the Mormon way.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thanks, you guys, for letting me sit in.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was
A
fun.
student who didn't read.
Mandy.
All right.
Yes, it
Thanks.
was.
What? Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye.